Yay for cutting off my entire family after they ambushed me at a family dinner with 33 relatives? My name is Avery. I am 27, and the night my life finally split in two began with a family dinner I never asked for. When I walked into my parents' house that Sunday, there were folding chairs and borrowed tables crammed into every corner. 33 relatives, all dressed like they were attending some kind of church banquet, turned and stared at me like I had walked into the wrong movie. Nobody hugged me. Nobody said, "Glad to see you." A few people gave a tight nod and then went back to their conversations as if I were a stranger who had wandered in off the street. I should have turned around and left right then. Instead, I sat in the single empty chair at the far end of the table. Food was already being served, but no one asked if I wanted a plate. No one made room. I just sat there, listening to them laugh about promotions, weddings, and baby showers, all the milestones I was apparently not qualified for. Then my mom stood up. She walked over to the wall where all the perfect family photos were lined up. She grabbed the frames with my face in them and yanked them down one by one. Glasses clinked as everyone fell silent. She threw my pictures into the trash can they had conveniently placed next to the table and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, that I was a leech who was going to bleed this family dry. My dad did not tell her to stop. He glared at me and demanded I return every dollar they had spent raising me, that I was nothing but a wasted investment. My sister pushed her chair back, stood up, and gestured toward the door like she was escorting a problem customer out of a store. I did not cry. I did not argue. I picked up my purse, walked out of the house I had just been erased from, and ordered a ride back to my apartment. They thought this was the end. They had no idea I had been silently tracking what they were doing with my name and my credit for months, and that this dinner was the final push. I needed to turn their perfect little show into the kind of legal revenge they would never see coming. When I got back to my apartment that night, my hands were shaking, but not because of what they said, because of what they had just confirmed. They did not see me as a daughter anymore. I was an item, a debt, something they thought they owned the receipt for. I dropped my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and went straight to my laptop on the kitchen table. I did not text anyone. I did not post anything. I opened a blank document and typed one sentence at the top in all caps, so I would not forget why I was doing this. This is not about hurt feelings. This is about what they did to my name. As the screen glowed in the dark apartment, I started to rewind everything I knew about my family. My mom is Diana, a high-level loan officer at a local credit union just outside Austin. The kind of person who likes to remind you she understands money every time you try to make a decision without her. My dad is Gareth, co-owner of a heating and air conditioning company, proud of building it from the ground up and proud of reminding me how much it cost to raise me. My older sister, Mallory, is the career counselor you see on school brochures, all soft smiles and inspirational quotes. On Facebook, we are the Baxters, the polished Texas family with matching Christmas sweaters and staged photographs at every barbecue, graduation, and church event. Offline, it has always been different. When I told them I was going to major in UX design instead of accounting or nursing, Diana called it a phase and asked when I was getting a real job. Gareth would joke in front of everyone that I was the artistic one, which in his voice meant the irresponsible one. Every choice I made that did not fit their script became a debt they thought I owed. In college, Diana insisted I open a joint account with her, just to help me manage my bills, so I would not mess up my credit. Back then I was 19 and exhausted, and I signed whatever she put in front of me. She set up the online banking on my laptop, saved all the passwords, and told me not to change them because I am the one who fixes things when you forget to pay. Years later, after I had moved to Austin and gotten my own place and my own job, she was still the one who had my social security number memorized, still the one who insisted my mail should go to her house because it is safer. I thought she was just controlling. I did not think it was criminal until the letters started arriving. A few months before that dinner, I got a notice from a bank I had never heard of, thanking me for applying for a personal loan. I assumed it was junk mail and tossed it. Then another envelope showed up, this time about a new line of credit. Around the same time, the free credit score app on my phone showed me a drop that made no sense. I was paying my one credit card on time and I was current on my student loans. Nothing I was actually using explained the dip. I took a screenshot. I meant to call someone, but then my week filled up with deadlines and meetings and I let it slide. That night, after the dinner, I did not let it slide. I pulled my free annual credit report requesting my files from all the agencies. As the files downloaded, I forced myself to stay seated, breathing slowly, letting the anger settle just enough so I would not make any sloppy mistakes. When the PDFs opened, it felt like someone had flipped on harsh fluorescent lights in a room I had only ever seen by candlelight. There were accounts I had never seen before, opened in cities I had never lived in, all tied to versions of my name and my old address at my parents' house. Small personal loans, a store card, a line of credit that had been maxed out and then rolled into a consolidation loan. The dates lined up perfectly with the years. I was too busy to read every piece of mail they forwarded to me. The mailing address on almost every account was my parents' house, and the phone number on several was Diana's. For a second, I just stared at the screen, waiting for some other explanation to appear. It did not. I created a new folder on my desktop and started dragging everything into it. Credit reports, screenshots of the alerts on my phone, photos I had taken of old envelopes when I thought they were just weird spam. I pulled out a notebook and started writing down the account numbers by hand, circling every single one that listed my parents' address instead of mine. Then I went to the government's identity theft website and followed the steps. One by one, I filed an official report, describing how someone with access to my personal information and our old joint account had opened lines of credit without my consent and routed them through an address where I no longer lived. I answered every form as if I were talking to a jury. After that, I placed fraud alerts with every credit bureau. Then I initiated a freeze, locking down my file so no one could open anything new in my name without jumping through layers of verification. Only when all of that was done did I open my design software. If there was one thing I knew how to do, it was to take a messy story and make it impossible to look away from. I laid out a simple infographic, nothing fancy, just clear icons, bold numbers, and short lines of text about how identity theft can start inside your own family. I did not use any names, not mine or theirs, just patterns, warning signs, and a quiet line at the bottom that said this had happened to me. I saved it with a generic file name that did not scream revenge. I exported it and looked at the finished image. They thought keeping everything in the dark would protect them. I was done leaving anything in the dark. The next morning, my phone looked like it had been in a car wreck. The lock screen was just a wall of missed calls and text previews stacked on top of each other. First was my dad around 5 a.m., call after call, as if he thought he could drag me back to his house through sheer persistence. Then my sister started. 20 missed calls by 7 a.m., a string of messages about how I had embarrassed everyone and owed mom and dad an apology. By 10 a.m., my mom had joined the chorus. Not with rage like the night before, but with paragraphs that started with, "We need to talk about this calmly," and ended with, "Please just answer one time." I stood in my kitchen in an old t-shirt, watching the numbers climb. Every buzz made my chest tighten, but I did not open anything. I just took pictures of the notifications one by one, and saved them in the same folder where I had put the credit reports. Inflow. Patterns. Proof that they only reached out when they needed something or when they realized they had finally gone too far. I made coffee, sat down at my table, and opened my laptop again. The infographic I finished last night was still on the screen. All clean lines and simple colors silently screaming. This can happen inside your own family. I uploaded it to an anonymous account I kept on a large discussion site, on a subreddit about personal finance and credit. The post title was simple. My family used my identity for years. This is what I wish I had noticed sooner. I attached the image, wrote a brief caption about someone close to me abusing their access to my information, and hit post before I could overthink it. Then I did the same on LinkedIn, but with a more subdued tone, framing it as an educational piece on red flags and the importance of monitoring your credit. I scrubbed anything that could point directly to my parents. I was not interested in public drama. I was interested in pressure. For a while, nothing happened. I answered a few work emails, sent a prototype update to my team, and pretended my life was not on fire. Then the notifications shifted. People started commenting, asking questions, and sharing their own stories of parents and spouses opening accounts behind their backs. It was equal parts comforting and horrifying to realize how common this was. One direct message stood out. The username was generic, but the message felt strangely familiar. They thanked me for posting. They said the design made it easy to understand, and then they added a line that made my skin prickle. Some of this sounds exactly like what my sister has been doing to the family. A minute later, another message from the same account arrived. Avery, is that you? I froze. Not many people in my life knew I did both UX work and side design projects, and even fewer would recognize my design style from a single infographic. I stared at the screen for a long second before typing back, asking who this was. The reply was almost immediate. It is Jacqueline. My mother's older sister, the accountant, the one who always seemed a little on the outside of family photos, like she had been cropped in at the last minute. She asked if we could talk somewhere that was not the group chat Mom used to send holiday invitations. We moved to a private call. I stepped out onto my small balcony as the morning traffic hummed on the street below. Jacqueline's voice sounded tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. She said she had seen my post on LinkedIn first, then found the same graphic posted again on Reddit, and something in her stomach had just seized up. She told me how a couple of years ago, my mother had helped her restructure some debt after a bad stretch with her freelance clients. She said she had signed a stack of papers because Diana told her they were just consolidating credit cards into a single payment. Jacqueline figured it was easier to let the money person handle it. Recently, though, letters had started arriving about a loan Jacqueline swore she never took out. When she asked Diana about it, my mother brushed it off as a clerical error and told her to ignore it. As Jacqueline talked, I opened another new file and started typing every detail she gave me. Names of banks, rough dates, the amounts she remembered, the words my mom had used. At one point, Jacqueline paused and asked very quietly, Avery, did she do this to you too? I told her about my credit reports, the accounts I never opened, my name being tied to their address long after I moved out. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, the slow intake of someone realizing a long-held suspicion was finally being confirmed. She said she had never trusted the way Diana inserted herself into everyone's finances. She had convinced herself Diana was just controlling, not criminal. I thought I owed her for the help, she admitted. Now I feel like I paid for it with interest I never agreed to. We agreed she would scan and email me every document she could find, every letter from collectors, every error Diana had told her to disregard. When I hung up, I had a fresh stack of puzzle pieces and a very clear picture forming in my mind. This was not just about me. This was a pattern. My phone buzzed again with a call from my dad, then my mom, then a cousin. I let it ring, watching their names flash on the screen. For years they acted like I was draining them. Now I was starting to see just how many people they had quietly drained to keep that image of a successful, generous family alive. I turned my ringer off, opened my files, and started building a timeline that did not care about holidays, bloodlines, or hurt feelings. It only cared about dates, dollar amounts, and signatures. Mallory texted me 2 days later as if nothing truly catastrophic had happened. She sent a single line first, asking if I could meet her for coffee near downtown to talk like adults, as if I was the one who had been ripping pictures off the wall. I almost ignored it, but then she followed up. It is about mom and money. Please. That second sentence accomplished what 33 relatives screaming at me could not. It made me curious. We met at a coffee shop a few blocks from my office, the kind of place with hanging plants from the ceiling and overpriced cold brew. Mallory was already there, sitting in a corner with her school lanyard tucked into her purse, her eyes shadowed like she had not slept since the dinner. When she saw me, she tried to smile, but it fell apart halfway. I sat across from her, my hands wrapped around a cup just to keep them steady. For a minute, we just existed in the same space, two people with the same last name, and no idea how to talk to each other without pretending everything was fine. She finally said she was sorry for how things went at the dinner. Not sorry for what was done, just that it got out of hand. She blamed stress, the economy, the pressure on mom and dad, as if any of that explained being kicked out of your own family like a party crasher. I let her talk until she ran out of excuses. Then I pulled a folder from my bag and slid it across the table between us. Inside were copies of my credit reports with every account I did not open highlighted. I told her I was filing for identity theft, that there were already fraud alerts on my file, and that bank regulators were going to start asking questions she was not going to like. Her face went pale as she saw her parents' address again and again next to my name. She tried to tell me Diana had just been helping, that mom knew how to get better rates, that this was how families worked when they trusted each other. I asked her when exactly trust started to mean signing someone else's name to a loan. That shut her up. I pointed to a medium-sized loan opened 3 years ago. Another line of credit folded into a consolidation, all using my old joint account information and my social security number. Then I showed her the email Jacqueline had forwarded to me, the one where Mom assured her a mysterious letter from a lender was just a mix-up and to ignore it. Mallory read it twice, her brow furrowing in a way that looked more like recognition than surprise. When I asked her directly if Mom had ever used her information for anything, she hesitated just long enough to answer the question without saying a word. Finally, she admitted there were a couple of times Mom had handled things for her too. Times when Mallory had been busy starting her new job and did not want to deal with the paperwork. A small consolidation, Mom had called it, a harmless cosign on a refinance. Mallory had signed a few pages because Mom told her where to initial and date, and it was easier than reading every line. As she talked, I opened my laptop and pulled up another copy of my notes. I asked Mallory if she remembered the names of the banks, rough dates, any amounts. She did. Too many of them matched the lenders on Jacqueline's letters and the ones attached to my file. It was starting to look less like separate favors and more like a system. The more Mallory dredged up old memories, the more they fit a pattern I was already drawing in my head. Mom would sweep in during a crisis, offer to fix things, collect signatures when people were tired or overwhelmed, and then redirect the money just enough to cover whatever she and Dad wanted to do next, whether it was paying off a business debt or remodeling a kitchen. When I mentioned Grandma Marjorie, something flickered in Mallory's face again. She said Mom had been the one who handled everything when Marjorie sold her house and moved into the independent living community. She had sat in on all the meetings, filtered all the calls, and handed a small check to the moving party, telling everyone the rest had gone to fees and taxes. It had never sat right with Mallory, but every time she tried to ask questions, Diana would scold her for being ungrateful. I typed as Mallory spoke, building a rough timeline. Year 1. I start college, open a joint account with Mom. Year 2. Jacqueline has a bad spell with clients, Mom steps in. Year 3. Grandma sells her house. Year 4. Dad's HVAC business suddenly has a new work truck and a remodeled office. On paper it was all just numbers. In real life it was favors, guilt, and a long history of Diana reminding everyone how much they owed her. When I told Mallory I had already filed with the FTC, her eyes went wide. When I mentioned that my mother's credit union would be forced to investigate once they saw how many loans were tied to their employees' relatives, she finally stopped trying to spin it. For a few seconds she just stared at the table, and then very quietly, she asked me what I planned to do next. I told her I was talking to a lawyer, not to sue the family for fun, but to protect myself before their mess completely burned down my financial future. If that meant bringing the whole rotten structure into the light, then that is what it meant. Mallory swallowed hard and said she would send me every email, text, and screenshot she had related to Mom and money, especially anything tied to Grandma or Jacqueline. She admitted she did not want her mom to go to legal trouble, but she was also tired of living with the sick feeling that something was wrong, and she was helping to hide it. As we finished, my phone buzzed again with a text from an unknown number. It contained a grainy photo. My father was standing next to a classic-looking HVAC truck, smiling with a beer in his hand. The caption read, "Funny how fast that upgrade showed up after Grandma sold the house." It was from my uncle on my dad's side, the one who always joked about Gareth forgetting where the family money came from. I showed the picture to Mallory and watched the last bit of denial drain from her face. On the bus ride home, I emailed a consumer rights lawyer whose name had come up several times in a thread about financial abuse. I attached a summarized version of my timeline, the documents I had so far, and told them in plain language that what had started as a humiliating family dinner had turned into a paper trail of signatures, loans, and missing money that all seemed to lead back to the same two people. My parents thought they had used that night to publicly isolate me. What they had really done was give me the last clue I needed to follow the money all the way back to them. A week after I met with Mallory, my mother showed up at my office as if she were just dropping by for lunch. I found out because the receptionist buzzed me. "Hey, there is a woman here asking for you. Says she is your mother. She seems intense." I walked out to the lobby, and there she was in her best work blazer, hair perfectly hairsprayed, clutching a leather folder like she was about to sell someone a mortgage. She smiled broadly when she saw me, the same smile she used on neighbors and people at church. "Avery," she said, standing up as if we were two professionals meeting for a friendly check-in. "Can we talk?" I looked at the receptionist at the cameras in the corners of the ceiling and told her we could talk right there. No closed doors, no private conference room. My mom did not like that, but she sat down anyway. She started with an apology, the kind you give when you are more worried about appearances than damage. She said things had gotten heated at the dinner, that everyone was emotional, and that she did not mean every word she said. She kept circling back to how hard things had been for her and my dad, how much pressure they were under, how ungrateful it felt for me to walk out in the middle of a family gathering. I let her talk until she revealed her real reason for being there. "I saw something online," she said, her voice dropping a little. "Some infographic about families and identity theft. People are talking. I need to know what you have been saying about us." There it was. Not "Are you okay?" Not "I hurt you." It was "What are you telling other people that might make my life harder?" I told her I had posted an educational graphic about what can happen when someone abuses access to another person's financial information. I reminded her that I had not used names, mentioned places, or pointed a finger at anyone directly. But I also told her I had filed an official identity theft report and frozen my credit. I told her the banks and regulators would be starting to ask questions about what she had done with my social security number and our old joint account. The color drained from her face. For a second, she dropped the gentle tone. "Do you have any idea what you have done? To my career? You have shattered this family." I told her I had a very clear idea of what she had done, to my credit, to Jacqueline's, and probably to Grandma's, long before I ever clicked submit on any report. I pulled a printed summary from my bag and slid it onto the coffee table, the one I had made for the lawyer I was talking to. It was not everything, just enough to show I was not guessing. There were dates, lenders, amounts, and the same home address showing up over and over again. My mom stared at it, her jaw tight. "You do not understand how this works," she said finally, trying to regain control. "I know people at these places. I know how to structure loans so they look good on paper. I did this to help you build credit, to help Jacqueline, to help your grandmother. No one was complaining until you decided to make a spectacle of it." I reminded her that helping someone usually involves telling them what you are signing them up for, not providing a signature without their knowledge, and then telling them to ignore collector letters. I mentioned the email Jacqueline received, where my mom called a serious notice a clerical error. I mentioned the timeline of money flowing into their accounts and Dad's business right after major family life events. Her eyes flashed. For a moment, I thought she might actually scream at me in the lobby. Instead, she leaned forward and lowered her voice, which was honestly worse. "You are my daughter," she said, as if that gave her some legal authority over my existence. "We do not take each other to court. We do not drag family business out in front of strangers. You want your credit fixed? I will fix it. I will make some calls, move some things around. But you need to stop whatever you have started. Take down anything you have posted. Tell whoever you talked to that it was a misunderstanding." Behind her, my boss, Travis, had walked out of a meeting room and was pretending to check his phone. He was just close enough to hear every word. I looked my mother in the eye and said no. I was not deleting anything. I did not consider it a misunderstanding. I was not going to help her keep this buried just because she was afraid of what it would do to her job title. She sat back, her eyes cold. "If this blows up, it will hurt all of us. Do you really want to be responsible for that?" I told her she had it backward. She was the one who had been signing her name to other people's lives for years. I was finally writing my own. She stood up fast enough to knock the leather folder against the table. "You are making a mistake," she said through her teeth. "When this comes back on you, do not come running to me." She walked out of the building without a glance at Travis, her heels clicking on the tile like a metronome. After she was gone, he walked over and asked if I was okay. I gave him a slightly simplified version, just enough to explain that there might be some awkward phone calls to the office. Instead of backing away, he offered to loop in our company's legal counsel if my mother tried to show up again, or if anyone started harassing me at work. That small gesture, someone believing me on the first try, felt like oxygen. Over the next few weeks, the ripples started to spread. Jacqueline sent me scans of everything she found. Loan documents with suspicious-looking signatures, bank statements that did not match what she remembered, emails where my mother told her not to overthink the numbers. My lawyer forwarded some of the information, with my permission, to my mother's credit union's compliance department. They were already looking into her because of the identity theft claim and how many loans were linked to her relatives. Now they had more than red flags, they had a pattern. A state investigator called me for follow-up questions about my complaint. It was not dramatic. There were no flashing badges or movie scenes, just a calm voice walking through dates and accounts, double-checking that I had not authorized any of it. Every time I answered no, I could feel something heavy shift a little more in my favor. At night, when the anger kept me awake, I worked on something new. The infographic had done its job, but I wanted a place where people could find concrete steps if they were going through the same thing. I built a simple website from scratch. Nothing fancy, just a clean homepage explaining how financial abuse and identity theft can happen within families, links to government resources, and a section where I broke my story down into anonymized case study pieces. I did not name my parents, I did not have to. The facts were ugly enough on their own. I watched as the traffic slowly grew as people shared the site in forums and group chats. Some of them were strangers. Some, I realized, were relatives. A cousin I had not heard from in years emailed me from a personal account, saying the layout of my case study felt uncomfortably familiar, and asking if I thought she should pull her own credit reports. I told her yes. Meanwhile, the messages from my parents went from rage to silence. For days, nothing. Then a flurry of texts from my father about family sticking together, and outsiders trying to pull us apart. The outsiders he meant were investigators and auditors who did not care about our last name. He was right about one thing, though. Something was pulling us apart. It was not the people asking questions, it was the answers. It took a few months for everything to catch up to them, which somehow made it feel even more real. This was not a dramatic movie scene where police burst through the door right after a big speech. It was slower, quieter, like a fuse burning under the floorboards. First came the formal letter from my mother's credit union, the one she bragged about working at for over 20 years. I got a copy through my lawyer. It said they were conducting an internal review of several loan files connected to her, and maybe reaching out to me for verification. A week later, a different envelope showed up from the state regulator's office, asking for permission to use my complaint and documentation as part of a larger investigation. I signed all the forms. I wanted every possible flashlight pointed at what they had been doing. I did not see most of what happened next in person. I heard it in pieces, the way you watch a house you used to live in get demolished from a few blocks away. Jacqueline told me about her interview first. She said she sat in a conference room with 2 compliance officers and a lawyer, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap they ached, and walked them through every favor Diana had done for her over the past 5 years. The consolidation loan, the refinance, none of it ever fully explained. The times Diana had told her to ignore letters because those companies make mistakes all the time. They showed Jacqueline documents with signatures that looked nothing like hers and asked if she had ever given Diana permission to sign for her. She said no. They asked if she had ever received the full amount those loans claimed she had. Again no. Next came Grandma Marjorie's part. She was too frail to sit through long meetings, so her lawyer arranged for a deposition at the independent living facility. As she told me later, Marjorie cried when she saw on paper how much money had passed through Diana's hands when her house was sold. There were profits she had never seen, fees no one had ever explained. She had trusted her daughter to look out for her. Instead, it seemed Diana had prioritized her own well-being and that of Gareth's business. Sometime in the middle of all that, my father decided to try his own kind of damage control. He called one afternoon and launched into a speech about outsiders trying to tear the family apart, about investigators who did not understand how families helped each other off the books. When I told him calmly that creating documents without consent and rerouting loan funds was not helping, he switched tactics, asking if I could just tell them it had all been a misunderstanding, that I had overreacted. I said no. He hung up on me. The official fallout started with my mom's job. Her credit union placed her on leave, which was their polite way of saying, "Do not come back while we figure out how bad this is." Co-workers she had known for 20 years were suddenly auditing loans she had personally processed. And so many of those loans had familiar last names, cousins, in-laws, my own. The pattern was not subtle. Then came a civil case. Jacqueline and my grandmother's lawyer filed a suit against not just Diana, but both of my parents, arguing that they had benefited from money obtained through misrepresentation. My name was listed in the filings, too, as a victim of identity theft and unauthorized credit accounts. My lawyer asked if I wanted to be there in person for the first hearing. I thought about it for a long time and said no. I did not need to sit in a courtroom and watch my mother pretend not to recognize her own handwriting. Instead, I signed a sworn statement, had it notarized, and let the paper trail speak for me. Mallory went. She texted me afterward and said she had never seen Mom look so small. Diana and Gareth showed up with their own lawyer, dressed like it was a Sunday at church, not the start of the most humiliating chapter of their lives. From what my lawyer described, their defense was exactly what I expected. They leaned heavily on the idea of family arrangements, on verbal promises, on helping relatives through tough times. They suggested that misunderstandings and sloppiness, not intent, had led to the mess. But every time they tried to frame it as a series of accidents, there were numbers that did not add up, signatures that looked wrong, and timelines that were far too convenient. Money flowed right when their business needed a boost. Right when they wanted to upgrade a truck or fix up the house. Right after another relative had signed something they did not quite understand. The court and the investigators did not care about vacation photos, church attendance, or who brought what to Thanksgiving. They cared about documentation. They cared about the way my mother's user ID showed up on loan files tied to relatives, the way her notes in the system mentioned a strong relationship with the borrower, while those same borrowers like Jacqueline were sitting in front of them saying, "I did not agree to any of this." Finally, the credit union made its decision. They fired my mom for violating multiple internal policies and reported her to the state. Her license was suspended while they decided if she would ever be allowed to work in the field again. All those years of boasting about being the one who understood money ended with her being escorted out of a building she once treated like her second home. On the civil side, my parents settled before it could get any worse. They agreed to repay the money that should have gone to Jacqueline and my grandmother, plus additional damages. They agreed to unwind and clear every loan they had opened in my name and Jacqueline's. They did it not because they suddenly found a conscience, but because their lawyer explained that fighting it would expose them to even more scrutiny, maybe even criminal charges if the wrong prosecutor got interested. They did not have the money to cover it all, so they did what people like them always swore they would never have to do. They sold the house in the suburbs, the one with the wall of family photos where I no longer was. They sold the miracle truck my dad loved to pose with. They sold off a piece of their company, bringing in a partner who, according to one of my cousins, made it clear he was there to fix the mess, not protect Gareth's pride. News travels fast in a family like ours. At first, some relatives were furious with me, convinced I had overreacted, that I had gone nuclear instead of keeping things in-house. Those same relatives got a lot quieter once letters started showing up at their doors, encouraging them to check their own accounts for irregularities. A few of them reached out to me privately to thank me, though they would never say it out loud at a gathering. The last time my dad called me, it was late, and his voice was raw. He said I had destroyed everything, that the family was in ruins, that Mom might never work in her field again, and that people at church were whispering. He told me he hoped I was happy, living my little independent life while they suffered. I listened to him rant until he ran out of words. Then I told him the only thing that felt true. I did not destroy anything. I just stopped covering up what you had been doing for years. The hole you are in is one you dug for yourselves. I just finally climbed out of it. He was silent for a long time after that. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. He said he never thought it would go this far. I told him it had gone this far the very first time my mother signed someone else's name to a loan. The only difference now was that someone had finally turned on the lights. A few more months passed, and the version of my family that existed on social media and in my childhood memories finally stopped matching the one that existed in real life. The word filtered back to me in pieces. My parents had moved out of the big house in the suburbs and into a cramped rental apartment on the edge of the city, the kind of place you drive past without really seeing. The yard my dad used to obsess over was gone. The wall of framed photographs was packed away in boxes. The neighbors they had spent years impressing barely said goodbye. My mother tried to keep up appearances for a while, dressing for job interviews in the same blazer she had worn to my office, but the doors kept closing. It turns out terminated after an internal investigation. Does not look great on a background check for finance jobs. She took part-time work wherever she could get it, nothing she could boast about. My father kept a piece of the HVAC company, but it was not really his anymore. The new partner came with spreadsheets and conditions, not family dinners and handshakes. An uncle told me Dad hated having to answer to someone, hated having to justify every expense, hated that people were whispering about why he suddenly needed to sell off assets in the first place. For the first time in my life, the consequences were landing on them instead of the people they leaned on. Mallory ended up transferring to a different school district after rumors about her parents started to circulate. She sent me a long text one night, saying she was angry and embarrassed and tired of feeling like she had to choose between being loyal and being honest. She did not apologize for what happened that night at dinner, not directly, but she did say she understood now why I had stopped laughing at the family jokes years ago. I told her I did not need her to pick a side. I just needed her to stop pretending what happened was normal. We are not suddenly best friends, but there is less static between us, a quieter honesty. Jacqueline and I talk more now than we ever did when I was a kid. She sends me pictures of her dog and updates on Grandma Marjorie, who is in physical therapy and budgeting her own money on her own terms for the first time in a long while. My grandmother wrote me a shaky letter, thanking me for not letting them make me small. She said she wished she had spoken up sooner in her life. I keep that letter in the same folder as all the ugly documents, a reminder that not everything that came out of this was destruction. Some of it was correction. As for me, my life did not magically turn into a montage. I still pay rent, still answer to a boss, still wrestle with my own anxiety some nights. My credit reports are clean now. The fraudulent accounts are gone. The freeze is still in place, this time by my choice. I got a small raise at work, not because of what happened with my family, but because I showed up, did the work, and refused to let the chaos drown me. The website I built about financial abuse and identity theft within families started getting more traffic than I ever expected. People I will never meet email me to say my case study helped them stop a parent from opening a loan in their name or gave them the language to talk to their spouse about money. On weekends, I take on a few extra design projects, turning dense legal information into something regular people can actually understand. It feels like taking back something my mother twisted and using it for the opposite purpose. I wish I could tell you there was a neat, happy ending where my parents apologized, meant it, and we all had an awkward but healing holiday dinner together. That is not what happened. They are still angry. They still talk about me like I burned the house down instead of pointing out there was a gas leak. Maybe that will never change. What has changed is me. I do not measure my worth by the approval I can get from people who only see me as an investment. I do not hand over my passwords, my signature, or my peace of mind just because someone shares my last name. If there is any lesson in all this, it is that love and loyalty do not mean letting others use you as collateral for their bad decisions. You can care about your family and still protect yourself from them. You can be hurt and still choose to walk through the front door of the law instead of skulking in the dark. And if you have even the slightest feeling that something is not right with your finances, you are not being paranoid, you should check. Pull your reports. Ask hard questions. Write things down. The people who truly love you will want the truth as much as you do. The ones who do not might call it a betrayal when you finally turn on the lights. But sometimes, turning on the lights is the only way to see who is really standing with you and who has only been using your shadow. Comment. After a story like this, I always find myself thinking about the quiet strength it takes to choose yourself. Setting boundaries is not an act of aggression, but a profound act of self-respect. It is about teaching others how you deserve to be treated, even when it feels impossibly difficult. True healing begins when we stop accepting a version of love that costs us our peace. You are not responsible for fixing the people who broke your trust. You are only responsible for building a life where you feel safe and valued. This process is never easy, so please remember to be kind to yourself every step of the way. Sometimes, the quiet life that follows the storm is the greatest victory of all. I hope you find the courage to protect your own peace, whatever that looks like for you. Take good care of yourself. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.